Nico Robin's I Want to Live moment in Enies Lobby is one of the most iconic scenes in One Piece history. The scene embodies the essence of One Piece: camaraderie, the fight for freedom, and the unyielding spirit of its characters. Fans deeply relate to Robin's moment of choosing life and accepting love, making it one of the most inspirational and memorable scenes in not only One Piece history, but anime history. So I got the idea one day to find the equivalent of this moment for every other Straw Hat on the crew. All of them have had their fair share of ups and downs throughout the series, maybe not as rough as Robin, but still, not everything has been smooth sailing. So before we get into the rest of the crew, I want to state the criteria that I was kind of looking for when choosing these moments. First, what makes this moment from Robin so special? Emotion. Robin had decades of built-up emotion inside of her that she unleashed during this moment. Remember, Robin has lived a life filled with isolation, betrayal, and fear. Branded as a dangerous criminal from the age of 8, she grew up believing that anyone who got close to her would be destroyed. It's this scene where she finally overcomes that emotional trauma and acknowledges her desire to live and fight for a place in the world alongside her crewmates. This moment wouldn't be felt without the incredible voice actors in both sub and dub who capture Robin's desperation and pain beautifully.
I want to live! Take me with you! Take me away from here!
Another thing I was looking for when choosing the I Want to Live moments was some vulnerability. Robin, who is usually calm and composed, shows raw, unfiltered emotion in this scene, and it's some of this vulnerability that I was looking for in other Straw Hat crewmates. Overall, this scene is a culmination of Robin's character arc, showing her growth and cementing her bond with the crew. So let's get into the other crew members and their I Want to Live moments. I think it's only fitting to start with the captain, Luffy. I think Luffy has one of the more comparable moments to Robin's. There's a lot of the same themes present in both of them. I would say that Luffy's I Want to Live moment is in Amazon Lily after the Battle of Marineford. Luffy is going through the worst emotional trauma he has ever experienced. He's grieving, he's angry, he's just distraught. He lost his brother. He had fought so hard to even make it to Marineford. He finally arrived and still had to go over all of these hurdles, fighting warlords, admirals, you name it. He nearly completes his mission too. He frees his brother from the execution platform, and it seems like everything is going right, and he's actually going to do it. He's going to save Ace. Then it all comes crashing down with one singular punch. All of that hope and hard work amounting to nothing. That is a devastating feeling, and it makes Luffy's crash out in Amazon Lily very justifiable. In his blacked out rage, he even bit Jinbe, one of his trusted friends. Luffy must have thought he was a piece of meat or something. Luffy had to release all of his emotions somehow, so he resorted to blind rage, just yelling and screaming. And it worked for a bit, but then it got to a point where he could seriously injure himself. He still wasn't completely recovered from the battle, so things got dangerous quickly. But even after all of this trauma, he has this moment, just like Robin, where he releases that pent-up emotion. This is when Jinbe reminds Luffy that he still has his crew. And that dialogue right there, "I still have my crew," is Luffy's I Want to Live moment. I think that holds up to what represents the moment that this video is about. The next Straw Hat I would like to talk about is Chopper. This one is definitely harder and a switch of tone compared to Luffy and Robin, because Chopper doesn't have a lot of character development. He's given a solid 14 episodes in the Drum Kingdom arc and has pretty much been pushed aside ever since. He's become more of a comedic relief character, and none of the arcs have catered to him at all. However, there is a moment of Chopper's that is very similar to Robin's. It does happen in Drum Kingdom, of course. It's the only place Chopper has had any development, but think about it for a second. Robin and Chopper have very similar backstories. Both of them were outcasts, they didn't have any friends, and they could trust nobody. But both of them do end up making one friend though. Robin's being Saul and Chopper being Dr. Hero Luck. This might be why Robin and Chopper are so close to each other. They do have one of the best relationships out of anybody on the crew, and I think it might be because they share similar paths. So for Chopper's I Want to Live moment, I kind of have two. First is in his backstory when he declares to Dr. Hero Luck and Dr. Kureha that he's not a monster. He's a reindeer. This moment is the culmination of Chopper's internal struggle with his identity. As someone who doesn't fully belong to either the human or reindeer world, Chopper endured rejection and loneliness, often being labeled as a monster. This was Chopper embracing his identity, while Robin's moment was her embracing her life. Secondly, when the Straw Hats are leaving Drum Kingdom, Chopper looks in the sky and says, "Doctor, look, I've made friends." This moment mirrors Robin's because it sums up Chopper's decision to live a life filled with companionship and trust. Both characters have endured immense loneliness and heartbreak, but their respective moments show their willingness to embrace a future where they are surrounded by people who love and support them. I think those two moments are Chopper's version of I Want to Live. Next up, let's do Usopp. I love Usopp's character, and I think a lot of people overlook him sometimes, partly due to the fact that he hasn't done anything since Dressrosa, but he still has some amazing development, and that happens in Water 7/Enies Lobby. I really like these arcs because it's the first real fight between some crewmates. Before this, the Straw Hats seemed like one big happy family, which is unrealistic. People are going to disagree and have arguments. Families do all the time, so it makes sense that the Straw Hats should too. And sure, Sanji and Zoro fight all the time, but theirs are more childish. They'll fight over anything you let them. But Luffy and Usopp's fight was real. It was raw. They both had stances that they firmly believed in and were willing to put their pride on the line for. I don't think either one of them was necessarily right or wrong, but Zoro was very smart in this situation when he said that Usopp can't just come back with no consequences, and that he needs to formally apologize beforehand. This leads into what I think is Usopp's I Want to Live moment. His heartfelt apology. As the Straw Hats are departing from Water 7 in their new ship, Usopp had been battling with his own feelings of inadequacy and his belief that he doesn't measure up to the rest of the crew. So I think him swallowing his pride and apologizing for what he did was a pivotal point. And it brings me back to what I said at the start. Robin's moment was real and vulnerable, and this moment was the most vulnerable we'd seen Usopp. Usopp's apology lays his feelings of inadequacy, guilt, and longing to be with the Straw Hat crew all on the table. That is his I Want to Live moment. Following Usopp is my man Brook. Off the top of your head, you don't really think that Brook has, an I Want to Live moment, but surprisingly, he does have one very similar, and just like Chopper, it's in the arc that he's introduced in, that being Thriller Bark. Most of Brook's character development so far was when he was first seen in Thriller Bark and we learn his backstory. Chopper and Brook are main characters, don't get me wrong, but they're not main characters like Luffy or Zoro. There's a big difference. They get less screen time, which makes their development a lot slower, but that's kind of besides the point. Let's talk about Brook's moment in Thriller Bark. He's a guy who went through some of the worst pain and loneliness I could imagine. First, he watches his entire crew, his friends, all die one by one. He can't do anything to help them. Then he's stuck on that boat for 50 years. I have not even been alive for half of that. He was stuck on that boat for more than double my own lifetime. I've said before, I think his character gag should be related to that because being alone for that long would really mess with you mentally. But Brook's I Want to Live moment is him declaring his loyalty to Luffy and deciding that life is still worth living. This is at the very end of Thriller Bark, and I think his desire to continue living even in his undead state mirrors Robin's plea, as both moments are about reclaiming the will to live after enduring immense suffering. Brook is a trooper, and that's his I Want to Live moment. The next crew member on the list is Mr. Prince, aka Sanji. Immediately I think about Whole Cake Island. It's an eerily similar situation to Robin's. Both of them were kind of pushing the crew away, thinking they were doing it for the greater good. There's a ton of similarities between the two, yes, but that's not my pick. There are thousands of videos breaking down Sanji in Whole Cake Island and the emotional trauma he goes through, how he felt trapped by his circumstances and that he had to leave the Straw Hats. The arc is great, but I want to shed some light on probably the most pivotal moment in his life, and that's in his backstory. Sanji makes the decision to run away from his family, which at that point was the only thing he'd ever known. Even though his brothers bullied him, his dad was abusive, and they locked him in a cage, Sanji still had feelings for them. They were the only people he knew in his life until he made that tough decision to leave. This is what I believe is Sanji's I Want to Live moment. He chooses to live for himself and not others, pursuing a life defined by his own values. Having escaped a family that dehumanized him, Sanji treasures the Straw Hats as his true family. It is the opposite of Robin's because she chooses to stop running and accept the crew as her family, while Sanji is choosing to run away from his family, but Sanji is choosing freedom by letting go of the shackles of his toxic past. Both moments took a lot of courage and vulnerability by Sanji and Robin, and I think this is a good I Want to Live moment for Sanji. Now let's quickly switch over to Frankie. I'm gonna be honest, Frankie was the toughest character to pick a moment for. Maybe there's something I missed, but overall, Frankie doesn't have a lot of emotional moments. He had a good arc in Dressrosa, don't get me wrong. His battle with Senor Pink was emotional and cool, but not really compared to the rest of the moments in this video. Besides that fight, for the most part, the rest of the series, he's just a chill guy. He does his duties, cracks some jokes, and builds himself new upgrades. That's about it. So there's not a lot of options for Frankie, but I ended up choosing a moment from him in Water 7. There's this very brief scene where he is reflecting on his past and his accident that led to his body being destroyed. Frankie confronts his past and acknowledges his transformation into a cyborg, but refuses to let it define or limit him. This is Frankie asserting his identity, and that's kind of what Robin did too. Frankie is showing that he accepts and embraces himself for what he is. Robin and Frankie were also both sought after by the government, so they have that in common. Like I said, there's not a lot from Frankie that we can choose from. His moment was very small, but I do think there were some similarities there. Next up, I want to talk about Nami, because she has a moment that is probably pretty close to Robin's in just how iconic it is. I'm sure you could guess this one, but Nami's moment is the Luffy help me scene in Arlong Park. These are two very different situations, but like most others in this video, there are definite similarities. Forced to work for the fishermen pirates to save her village, Nami endured years of emotional torment, believing she had to shoulder the burden alone. Remember, she didn't tell anyone from her village that she was working with the fishermen to try and buy back their freedom. She dealt with all that pressure for years, and it's this moment where her emotional walls crumble and she accepts that she doesn't have to fight this battle by herself. Nami's plea is a raw expression of her deepest desire for freedom and trust, breaking free from isolation and signaling the end of her oppressor's control, much like Robin's plea in Enies Lobby. Nami not only reclaims her freedom, but also begins to trust her crew deeply, strengthening her bonds with them even more. I don't have much to say about this one. Both moments are pretty much the same, but just in different situations, if you know what I'm trying to say. So that brings me to the second to last crew member, the helmsman Jinbe. Remember when I said Frankie was the toughest character to choose a moment for? Well, I'm taking that back, because Jinbe was really hard. He is the newest Straw Hat member, so you can argue that he hasn't had enough time to get an emotional moment like this yet, but he's been around for a while, since Impel Down, and he got a lot of screen time in Fishman Island. So there have been a lot of opportunities, but Jinbe's a stoic guy, so he's not really gonna get all emotional and soppy like ever. That's what made it really difficult to find a moment comparable to Robin's. However, I did decide on one, and it is in Fishman Island. I think that Jinbe's I want to live moment is his confession to Luffy, where he takes responsibility for the cycle of hatred and violence that has plagued both fishmen and humans. By reflecting on his past, including his alliance with Arlong and his inability to stop the extremist action of his fellow fishmen, Jinbe acknowledges his mistakes and expresses his desire to move forward, breaking free from the hatred that defines so much of his past. Jinbe's heartfelt confession parallels Robin's moment because both of them are confronting their past. They're also embracing vulnerability and finding strength in the Straw Hats to continue pushing forward in a new future. It's a small moment, and maybe I'm reaching, but I feel like the connections between the two of them are there. And that brings us to the last member of the crew, Mosshead Zoro. Some people would say that nothing happened is the obvious choice here, but I don't agree with that. I think I Want to Live and Nothing Happened are two completely different moments. This one is about showing loyalty, while this one is about overcoming past trauma. Also, I have an entire video just like this one about every Straw Hat's Nothing Happened moment, so I don't want to include Nothing Happened when I've already talked about it plenty. However, that makes it tough to choose a moment for Zoro because much like Jinbe, he's not that emotional, especially post-time skip. He forgot how to smile post-time skip. So there's very few options that are similar to Robin's iconic moment, but I did choose one that I think is pretty good. I think Zoro's I Want to Live moment is after his fight against Mihawk at the Baratie, when he makes this declaration to Luffy.
Okay, you can stop saying things now! Hey, bro! I solemnly swear, from this moment forward, that I will never lose again!
Zoro is forced to confront the reality of his own limitations, but instead of giving up, he turns it into a moment of resolve. Until this point, Zoro had shown little to no emotion, but here we see him crying for the first time. Fun fact, Zoro has actually only cried 3 times in all of One Piece, the first being right here, the second at the death of his childhood friend Kuina, and the third when he found out Granny Kokoro was a mermaid. I wish I was lying. Just as Robin's declaration is a moment of raw emotion, Zoro's vow is where he commits fully to his dream and his role within the crew. This moment is more focused on Zoro's physical strength, while Robin's is definitely more emotional, but I still believe both moments are like announcements of their purpose and resolve. That wraps up this video. If you guys did enjoy it, it'd mean a lot to me if you drop a like, and I'll see you in the next one.